Tonight from Japan, this is World News, reporting on the disaster in the Pacific. Now, there are four troubled nuclear reactors at one site. What happens if they all melt? And who are the 50 brave workers who agreed to stay inside and try to save everyone else? We go out with rescue crews, calling out for signs of life in the rubble. Make a noise, they say. Is anybody there?
Hello? Is anybody there? Is anybody there?
And survivors did emerge today. And we'll tell you what is the real danger for the United States. What about that run on potassium iodide pills? And on World News, lessons for all of us from survivors of that Hiroshima radiation 60 years ago.
From ABC News, this is a special edition of World News with Diane Sawyer. Disaster in the Pacific. Reporting tonight from Japan.
Good evening to everyone in the United States. Here in Japan, as we said, there are 50 workers inside a nuclear power plant, and they are battling the complete unknown at this moment, trying to prevent a nuclear power meltdown. And in this breaking news, we have received word that there is another fire, a new fire underway at one of those reactor sites. Let me show you a headline in the newspaper here. This is the Japanese symbol for stop. These are the symbols that say it is not stopping, it is deteriorating. And at the same time, the sea of humanity is in the rubble all across this country. Up north where the devastation occurred, we see people standing there, 500,000 of them homeless. Not to mention all of those waiting in the lines for the scarce supplies at the grocery stores now running out. But I want to turn to David Muir. He drove into Tokyo last night, through the night, as I did. And we were saying, David, the more the government goes on the air to say, stay calm, we're sorry, but stay calm, the less calming it is.
And that's exactly what the Prime Minister said last night, Diane. Stay calm. But then he also warned of possible more radiation to come. And you spoke of the hundreds and thousands of evacuees now headed away from those nuclear power reactors that have caused so much trouble. Now the question about the band of workers who stayed behind. At what risk?
The line of cars stretched for miles, a race to get out of the danger zone. 200,000 people and counting, trying to get away from those battered nuclear reactors. Evacuation shelters had trouble keeping up, and many of the people in the shadow of those reactors are now terrified and angry.
This man said nuclear power is the most frightening thing, even more than a tsunami. The government, nobody tells us, the citizens, what is really happening.
Their anger comes after Japan's prime minister told the nation the leaked radiation level is now rather high, and there is high chance for further leakage of radiation from now on. Over the past couple of days, one reactor exploded after another at the doomed nuclear plant. Then yesterday, the first fire broke out, and an unprecedented third reactor exploded, both sending radiation into the air. Officials worry this blast was the worst, cracking part of the critical container that surrounds the fiery hot nuclear core.
The radiation levels are getting so high that the workers can't stay there.
In fact, for the first time, 750 workers at the Fukushima plant were told to leave to seek safe shelter. Only about 50 now remain. They are the last line of defense, willing to stay and continue what so far has been a difficult mission, using fire pumps to flood ocean water into those red-hot cores so they don't melt down completely. Nuclear experts tell us those workers are likely wearing full bodysuits with air packs, rotating in and out, resting in some sort of armored control room or safe room. Bravery beyond measure. In fact, the medical community tells us that if those workers absorb radiation levels reaching 1,000 millisieverts, the equivalent of 25,000 X-rays at once, the symptoms are immediate, from vomiting to a steep decline in white blood cells, wiping out their immune system. We've seen it before, the workers who stayed behind at Chernobyl. 28 firemen and emergency workers dying within just 3 months' time. They were the ones who stayed behind to try to save the plant.
They knew that by trying to contain the fire at Chernobyl, they would be exposed to lethal radiation. They did it anyway. You have to think that at least some of the workers at this Japanese facility understand the risks and seem to be willing to pay that price.
And as we left the evacuation zone surrounding Fukushima,
You can see, we're sitting in traffic.
the crush of evacuees heading for safety as those brave workers stay behind.
Today, the IAEA had reported that the radiation levels here in Japan had actually decreased around the Fukushima nuclear power plant. And there were some people actually asking if this country had in fact dodged a bullet. But tonight, that new fire underway. It points out just how hour by hour this crisis has been unfolding.
Volatile in every sense of the word. And for those of us who heard first about nuclear power plants, probably from the phrase China syndrome, we wondered if it's still a reality, a tunneling through the earth. So we asked our Martha Raddatz to tell us more tonight.
How bad could it get? The big fear is nuclear meltdown, meaning the reactor core gets so hot it turns into a radioactive molten mass, breaks through the containment vessel, spewing radioactivity through the air, ground, and water. In the Hollywood China syndrome version, they claim the mass could melt through a steel floor through the earth to China. No one thinks that could happen. But the reality for Japanese reactors?
This is way past 3 Mile Island, and we are heading into Chernobyl territory.
The difference, 3 Mile Island was only a partial meltdown that stayed inside a containment vessel. Result, no injuries, no serious radiation leak. Chernobyl, total meltdown, no containment vessel, radiation spewing for thousands of miles, leaving death and increased cancer rates in its trail. In Japan, there are 6-foot-thick concrete and steel containment vessels, with that one now believed to be cracked and leaking.
Which means that if there is a nuclear meltdown, more radiation escapes, and it could happen in more than one reactor.
What could be done to stop it if efforts to cool the reactors with seawater finally fail?
Try to surround that molten mass with sand and concrete, entomb it.
A massive operation the Japanese are not yet ready to try. Martha Raddatz, ABC News, Washington.
Thanks, Martha. I want to turn now to our medical editor, Dr. Richard Besser, with some questions about radiation and the body. Rich, we heard David Muir tell us that those who are right around the worst of the site could see immediately the effects of radiation poisoning. What do you do if that happens?
Well, Diane, what you're going to see, radiation affects your entire body, but what you're going to see early on is radiation affecting the parts of the body where cells divide very quickly, and that's your gastrointestinal tract. You're going to see nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and fever. The same kinds of things someone has when they're going through radiation treatment for cancer. That will let you know you've had a big dose of radiation.
And again, we're talking about acute radiation poisoning with those symptoms. I want to move out to the wider circumference of people who've been told to stay inside or try to evacuate. What are the effects on small children, and what about pregnant women, and what about breast milk?
Well, one of the big effects that you want to try and prevent is the development of thyroid cancer. And the reason that's a risk, and it's a risk in particular to young children and pregnant women, is that the thyroid gland in your neck takes in iodine. And iodine is one of those radioactive elements released very early from a reactor. So that comes into your body, it goes into your thyroid gland where you make a thyroid hormone. You can block that, though, by giving people potassium iodide. Those are the pills that are being distributed. You can protect them from thyroid cancer.
Right, but I want to show everybody this pill because we've all been issued them here, these tiny pills. You have to be careful, don't you, about taking them for too long a period, especially children?
Well, you definitely don't want to take them unless it's necessary. If you're being exposed to ongoing radioactive iodine, taking those pills far exceeds any risk. However, they can be a risk to very young babies. They can cause mental retardation. You don't want to use them without guidance. You want to listen to the recommendations and follow them very closely.
And we want to thank you, Rich Besser, and tell everyone that you're going to post more information about radiation and the body online. Some numbers now in tonight. We now have 3,500 confirmed dead here in the disaster area in Japan, and at least 7,400 reported still missing. That undoubtedly will rise. And we were out earlier today with some of the rescue teams who are going house to house looking for a hopeful sound. Can't imagine how they're going to clean this up. Look at this. Shovels, probes, and their voices. That's all they have. No little microphones, no sniffing dogs. Over and over again, we hear them shout. Anyone there? Are you there? Are you there? Make a sound, any sound. We'll hear you. There is only silence answering them, and the irony of the birds chirping in the trees. Do you still hope to find survivors?
Yes, we are.
You do. So any of these houses could still have somebody in it, waiting for you.
Yes, indeed.
Look, the refrigerator door has opened. Out pours the noodles. Daily life frozen in place. Look at this one. How would you know? Hello? This is unbelievable. They're going room by room. All the shoes that you wear, slippers that you put on because you don't track dirt inside a Japanese household. They still have the dishes on the shelves. So it really came up just below those cups. Can you see? Everything else perfectly stacked. Oh, dog. Oh. So you get a sense of the distance. This is the ocean on the other side of the trees, so it had to go over those trees, through this plain, over this other, and straight on up. But there's no cliff. There's nothing to stop it. It's just, it's got a flat, direct route. In another part of the devastation, American workers from Los Angeles and Fairfax, Virginia scour the town, and they do have rescue dogs, listening equipment, state of the art. So far, no survivors there. Up in a port city north of us, unexpected joy. This man rescued after 5 days buried in rubble. Reunions in person and by phone. And not far away, one of those signs of community we've come to expect everywhere in Japan. A noodle shop escaped the water, but is offering meals at no charge. The cook says his home was washed away, but he comes to work, he says, because he wants to do something for those who have even less. As we said, we wanted an answer. What are the real odds that radiation from Japan could travel all the way to the United States? And how much would it really be? So right now, Dan Harris has our reality check.
Across America tonight, the radiation fears are palpable. There's a run on iodide pills, Geiger counters, and emergency kits on Amazon.com. And everywhere from Hawaii,
I don't trust what they're saying,
to Seattle, to Missouri. But how worried should we really be? Radiation is all around us and even inside of us all the time, and it's perfectly natural and safe. To illustrate the point, we got a hold of this Geiger counter. And as you can see, even right here in New York City, in the middle of Central Park, there is always a background level of radiation. Check this out. We're at a food stand, and we're going to put the Geiger counter on some bananas, which contain potassium, which you need to live, but also is radioactive. And you can see the Geiger counter goes up just a little bit. And for the most dramatic reading, here's what happens when we go up to this monument to Christopher Columbus. It's made out of granite. Granite is radioactive, but perfectly safe. And as you can see, the meter is pretty much pinning. In fact, you're exposed to it every time you fly because you're closer to the radiation of outer space. Every year, just walking around the planet, each of us is exposed to about 3.5 millisieverts, that's the term they use, of radiation. That's about 67 chest x-rays, or the same as 134 cross-country plane trips. In order to get radiation sickness, you need to be exposed to 1,000 millisieverts at once. And for most people, a fatal dose is about 5 times that. To put this all in perspective, the radiation levels at the scene of the fire at the nuclear power plant in Japan reached about 400 millisieverts, meaning you would have had to sit there for about 2.5 hours to get sick. But what about a worst-case scenario? What if there's a full meltdown? Will that reach us here in America?
Even if we had a Chernobyl-type accident, the impact on the United States would be minimal.
Which is why, despite those scary pictures out of Japan, the experts are telling us tonight that there is no threat to us here. Dan Harris, ABC News, New York.
And again, we're reporting to you from central Tokyo tonight. We'd show you the whole city, but we're not allowed to be up high because of the aftershocks. And no one wants to have us up on balconies or on the roof. But I want to bring in Clarissa Ward, who covers Asia for ABC News, because you went to some of the most inaccessible, difficult regions, and you saw some things that both inspired and haunted you, I know.
That's right, Diane. I mean, just scenes after scenes of death and destruction. It's almost hard to convey with words the scope of this devastation.
Pushing up Japan's coast, a series of surreal landscapes. Boats swept miles inland, ships tipped on their side.
Now, the ocean is actually just under a mile in that direction, but looking behind me, you would never imagine that because huge swaths of this town are still completely submerged underwater. And of course, it's impossible to know just how many people died here until that water recedes.
The Japanese army is just starting to come in to help. But for most aid workers, it is a logistical nightmare, hampered by roads, blocked by debris. The Japanese Red Cross tells us radiation concerns have not impacted their operations, but every radiation scare means more evacuees, more people without homes. There are simply so many people who need so much help. Residents improvising tools for survival. A man cutting into this drum so it could be used to boil water. And a bucket brigade, villagers in a line working together to have some clean water. At this makeshift shelter, we meet 81-year-old Kaneo Carino. I couldn't see my wife anywhere, he tells me, and then she came to the surface, so I grabbed her hair and pulled her onto the log. 26 hours later, they were rescued by a helicopter. As we flew away, I looked down and I saw that the entire village was gone, he says. I have no idea if anyone else is alive. It's one of many sad stories. Still, people find solace in sharing their experiences and come up with ways to pass the time, savoring small pleasures, lucky to be alive.
And of course, one of the other challenges facing these aid workers is just the enormous amount of aftershocks we've been experiencing. Literally, sometimes every 5 or 10 minutes, and every time there's an aftershock, there's always the fear there'll be another tsunami.
And we should say again, it is freezing here and freezing at night. So for people to survive at all is so tough without electricity. And those roads were cracked in places as you tried to travel.
Roads cracked, trees blocking the way, landslides, incredibly difficult terrain to navigate, Diane.
All right, Clarissa, thank you. Good to have you with us here in Tokyo tonight. As Americans remember, so many lives were lost as Americans battled the Japanese in World War II. And 2 atomic bombs were released in an effort to prevent more American lives being lost. But they were bombs that changed both countries with their destruction and the consequences of the radiation. So we decided to see if we could find some of the Japanese who were there. Take a look at these images of Japan today. And now look at these. The eerie replica, a landscape in ruins more than 65 years ago. We gathered some of the survivors of the bombs and radiation at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In this country, where there's an appreciation of the wisdom of elders, they look back with a message. This man survived the death of more than 200,000 of his fellow Japanese. And this Survivors Club is ready to share what they've learned with the children today.
I was 18 years old when I was working at the factory just 4 kilometers from the epicenter.
Today, she is a grandmother. Back then, she was a child 7 years old. She tells us of all her friends at school, only 3 of them survived. But as we know, these are the people who rebuilt their lives and their country. This is Japan then and Japan today. A child then and a child today. As this generation of Japanese say, there is a different kind of strength you learn after you survive something terrible. And of course, so many Americans coming in to help with the rescue tonight. That's World News from Japan. Don't forget, we're always online at abcnews.com, and Nightline will be here later tonight. We hope you have a really good evening, and we'll see all of you back in America.